My name is Travis Day. For those of you that maybe played WoW back in early alpha or early release, you might also know me as Indalamar. I'm a senior game designer with Blizzard Entertainment. I've been there 12 years. These are some of the games that I worked on. I helped ship Burning Crusade, Wrath of the Lich King, Cataclysm, Miss Pandaria, and then I transferred over to the Diablo 3 team after working on WoW for 7 years to help with post-launch development of Diablo 3 and primarily focused on reward and system design for Reaper of Souls expansion. So I just wanted to give a talk today to sort of share some of the lessons that I've learned working for the last 12 years on these games, sort of tell the stories of the mistakes that we made and the lessons that they taught us in the process. A quick overview are maintain established rewards, balance deterministic and random, make everything feel overpowered, and be generous. So jumping right into it, maintaining established rewards, aka understanding the overjustification effect. So the overjustification effect occurs when an expected external incentive such as money or prizes decreases a person's intrinsic motivation to perform a task. And that sounds super boring, but I'll explain how that makes sense to video games. So anytime I talk about the importance of maintaining rewards, I usually tell the story of the overjustification effect and the decades of research done on the topic. Generally, the story that I like to share is one of two small groups of children. Group one is set down at a table with crayons and told, we're going to pay you $0.25 for every picture you color us. Group two is also set down at a table with crayons and paper and said, feel free to draw. So the first group of children will continue coloring for far longer than the second group, but at any point that the payment stops, if you stop giving them $0.25 for the pictures, they'll stop coloring. This is similar to the effect we see in video games all the time, where players are usually carried through a game, whether through leveling or progression of some variety, and often once a player reaches a certain point, that reward mechanism disappears, whether it's you stop gaining experience or whatever carried you through the system stops moving you forward. Sorry, I haven't done this in presentation mode, so I'm trying to figure out where the next button is. So for Diablo 3, we experienced something like this when our game first launched. Players found themselves leveling up, progressing through the story, progressing through increasingly challenging levels of difficulty. And because Diablo 3 has such a random reward structure, oftentimes players who had reached the end game would start finding that they could go a night, maybe 2 nights, maybe an hour, and have nothing to show for their time. So this was an issue that we wanted to address in Diablo 3, and we introduced something called Paragon levels. Paragon levels were basically just a way for players to continue earning experience. Anytime that they would kill monsters, that they would earn experience, they would gain Paragon experience instead, and every time they earned enough, they would increase in Paragon level, which would give them some stats. The primary intent of this was to sort of provide an underlying reward mechanism for the players to sort of offset bad RNG. Sometimes you wouldn't find a good item, but hey, at least you got some Paragon levels. Something that we came to realize over time, though, was that this system also had the consequence of sort of making people feel tied to characters and limiting their ability to experience the game in different ways. Because maybe you've got a barbarian, he's Paragon level 40, but you really like playing your wizard. Well, anytime you spend on your wizard, you feel like you're not making this accrued experience on your barbarian, and therefore you're kind of wasting time. As we moved into Reaper of Souls, we acknowledged that this had some consequences that we needed to fix. Our solution at the time was, okay, well, we want to award the player playing the game, not the individual avatar. As long as you're playing Diablo, you're having fun, we don't want anything to make you feel tied to a character or prevent you from experiencing the game in different ways. So our first step was to take all the Paragon levels and first off remove the cap so that players wouldn't run out of Paragon levels. Our truly hardcore audience would sometimes reach the level cap of 100 and then find themselves back in the situation of, well, I played all night, I didn't get anything. So we wanted to fix that. We also wanted to expand the ability for people to play a stable of characters. And lastly, we added spendable points just because we thought, well, it's fun to customize your character. You want to be able to sort of make up for whatever your gear is lacking or double down on a certain play style. On the World of Warcraft front, they recently ran into the same experience. So they did an overhaul. I don't know who in here has played. Who's played World of Warcraft in here? Okay. So hopefully you guys will understand most of the stories I'm telling. So in their most recent expansion, Legion, they sort of did an overhaul to their PvP system. In WoW, whenever you do a battleground or participate in the arena, you would earn some honor. Once you earn enough honor, you would level up. The newest version of the system that they launched in Legion was sort of one where every time you would level, you would unlock a new talent, or you would gain some money or some artifact power, which is a way that you could advance your character's items. Unfortunately, once you got to the end of this curve, instead of resetting or anything of that nature, they gave you a prestige button. And if you pushed the button, you would reset all the progress you did and allow yourself to keep leveling, and you would then unlock some cosmetics or something of that type. I don't think this occurred to them at the time, but many people who play World of Warcraft don't like resetting all of their progress. So for a lot of people, they would reach the max level of honor, and they would stare at this button and go, nope, not doing that, because all my passives are really cool, and I don't want to PvP without them. And that had the side effect of basically taking the entire reward mechanism that was propping up PvP in World of Warcraft, and for large swaths of the characters, sort of just deleting it. So in order to try to address that, the World of Warcraft team took a page out of Overwatch's book and said, okay, we're not going to push a button. You don't have to, it's just gonna happen. When you hit level 50, you'll reset to level 1. We're not gonna take anything away from you. You'll keep all of your passives and perks unlocked. And instead, anytime that you would have earned one of those, we're just gonna give you some more gold or some more artifact power. So this allowed players who had lost all of their incentive to continue through the PvP system to continue engaging as much as they desired without actually giving up anything. So really, the point and the lesson that we learned over time was that rewards can do as much harm as good, and it's important to know when to use them and when not to. If you do use a reward system, it's important to maintain it and not let it fall out from under the players. Something that we talk about often at Blizzard is not only when should we use rewards, but when should we not use them. Overwatch is actually a great example where during their early development, they were working on progression systems, like, oh, maybe you level up a gun for a character, maybe you unlock something that way. And at some point, I don't remember when, but I remember talking to the guys who were working on it, and they were like, yeah, we're not going to do rewards, we're just going to get rid of that. I was like, that's good, because it would make shooting people way less fun if I was just focusing on grinding out the next gun or the next cosmetic. They still have that, but it's randomized, and if you've played Overwatch, hopefully you're aware of how that system works. Balanced, deterministic, and random, aka that time we broke the WoW reward structure. So I'm going to tell the story of Badges of Justice. This is a story from many, many years ago that some of you may or may not be familiar with. So when we were working on the development of Burning Crusade, before we had actually shipped it and we knew anything about what the game was going to be, we were trying to sort out what were we going to do to reward this new idea of heroic dungeons. For those of you who aren't familiar with WoW, back in these days, the dungeon size for our players was 5-person dungeons. You could go into a dungeon, you could get 4 of your buddies, kill a bunch of bosses, get some items. The only other piece of content that you had access to was 40-man raids. And in 40-man raids, it was a very similar experience, except you would get 40 people together, you would go kill a boss, and the 40 people would get 2 items and have to figure out how they were going to divvy that up. So when we were going, okay, what does it mean to have a heroic dungeon? we've got 5-man content over here, you get a couple items, we've got 40-man content over here, there's not a lot of in between. And I remember we were talking going, well, you know, if 40 people get 2 epics, then maybe in a 5-man dungeon you get a piece of an epic. That is how the Badge of Justice was born. It was not the best idea, but I'll get to why. So players, every time they would kill a heroic dungeon boss, would earn a couple of Badges of Justice. They could take the Badges of Justice to a vendor, and the vendor would have a limited assortment of items that they could purchase. So we had introduced this system, Burning Crusade launched. Generally, it was working out okay. And during the development of Burning Crusade, we had also introduced our first 10-man raid called Karazhan. Karazhan was meant to sort of be a stepping stone between our 5-man dungeon content and our more challenging endgame raids. We had brought down the raid size from 40 to 25 during the Burning Crusade, so 10 was kind of an in-between. We had 5-man dungeons, 5-man heroics, 10-man raids with Karazhan, and then 25-man raids. Karazhan itself at the time was meant to sort of be this intermediary. It was, in our minds, not real raiding because it was only 10 people, so we didn't give loot that was as good as what the 25-man raiders were earning. It was sort of thought that players would progress from normal dungeons into heroics, into Karazhan, and hopefully check out, you know, the real raids. So we started getting feedback, both internally and externally, from our players saying, hey, this is fun, we're having a good time, the loot's pretty good for us, but man, I could really use some of that Badge of Justice loot. Why aren't you dropping badges in the 10-man raid? And we talked about it and we thought, well, that's not unreasonable. The items that they're wearing right now are worse than the badge gear. They're also substantially worse than the drops from the raid zone, but since we only dropped, I think, 2 items at this point for 10 people, which we thought was a huge leap forward coming from a land where 40 people got 2 items, we thought, okay, you know what, we can go ahead and add badges here. These are really the target audience for these items. Let's just go ahead and add them to Karazhan. So, after we added our 10-man badges to Karazhan, we then had people internally and externally start giving us feedback. Hey, we're doing the 25-man raid, Serpent Shrine Cavern. Why are the 10-man raiders getting things that we don't get access to? This is way harder than what they're doing. And we thought, well, that's true. The gear is not really built for you, but okay, why not? Maybe you've got some pieces that need replacing. Let's go ahead and add the Badges of Justice to the 25-man raids. So, this caused a new problem where people were suddenly getting badges that didn't really have much use, and we thought, well, if we're going to drop them, they need to be relevant to these people. So we had this brilliant idea where, okay, we'll just start adding a couple new items every time we add a new piece of content tier to the vendor, and then the people who are getting them out of the raid will have something that they actually want. Unfortunately, and I don't know why we didn't see this coming, players started farming badges to buy the items ahead of time. They would see the PTR, go, oh man, look at these cool items that they're going to put on the vendor soon. Everyone go farm these crappy old contents and get a lot of badges together. So people started farming badges. For the hardcore players, they were sort of forced into this behavior where they were accruing a currency that they didn't normally care about from content that was way trivial to them. And for the more casual or average user, they were getting access to items that were meant for the really hardcore raider that were way beyond anything they were ever going to find any other way. So we wanted to fix that. And moving into the Wrath of the Lich King development, we were like, okay, we need to stop the pre-farming. We need to make sure that the rewards are commensurate with the content people are doing to some degree. So let's go ahead and make a different badge type for all the different content levels. So we'll have the low level badge, the medium level badge, the high level badge, and we'll just have loot that makes sense. So if you're doing content A, you get badge A, that'll get item A, and B gives you badge B, we'll buy item B, and so on. While assembling this presentation, I found this picture, and I showed it to Tom and Chilton and some of the other guys who used to work on this with us. And my thought was, what the hell were we thinking? So this is what badge system looked like during Wrath of the Lich King. There were ultimately 5 different types of badges with 5 different vendors associated with them. and if you could find a badge, you'd have to go to a city and look for like, all right, which of these vendors is the right vendor, and you could downgrade badges in case you missed a set piece you really had to have. It was a train wreck. The whole thing was terrible. So we ended up with way more than we wanted, and ultimately, I don't know, I'm sorry. If you played through this, I'm sorry, it's my fault. I apologize. The whole thing was just a total phrasing, can't say. So, while we were working on all that, we kept getting feedback like, hey, these systems are better, you know, we fixed a lot of problems. Granted, this is 10 years ago us, and we were naive. But I remember Tom coming to me and saying, hey, I still haven't got my set piece, you know, it would be really cool if I could just buy that because I've been trying to get it for 2 months. Why don't we just put the sets on the vendors too? Like, okay, we could put the sets on the vendors too. Why not? We've got 5 different tiers of badges. You know, most players are going to be insulated from this. Let's just go ahead and do that. Why not? Sure, you're the boss. And then this. So at that point, we sort of had created initially this system that was meant as an introductory for the more average user into sort of a transition of the harder levels of content. The items were meant to be commensurate with it. And then we sort of looked around and realized, okay, we've instead replaced sort of the heart of what it is to kill a boss and the excitement of link the loot with something that sort of felt like a paycheck. We've instead replaced the anticipation of seeing what items dropped and figuring out who gets them with the system of killing a boss, seeing +5 badges, and going, sweet, in 372 badges, I'll have my set, I'll be done. So let me look at my calendar. Awesome, 3 months from now, I'll have everything I want. Once we replaced that sense of anticipation, with something that felt like a foregone conclusion, the players stopped being excited about killing the content or doing the raids they'd been doing, and instead felt like we were creating this really grindy system and sort of keeping everything back from them. So in an attempt to address that, World of Warcraft introduced some systems that were meant to sort of re-inject the sense of anticipation and the randomized reward back into the game while preserving some of the elements of the deterministic reward structure. They introduced a token, I forget what it's called these days, it's got a bunch of different types, but there's a token where you can earn a couple each week, and whenever you kill a boss, a little box pops up and says, do you want to spend a token? And you can say yes or no. And you can spend your tokens to basically get bonus rolls on the boss's loot table. So players have more control over trying to find specific items than they used to, but it's not a list of items where they save up 500 currency and go buy something. In addition to this, they also introduced the concept of something called Warforged items. For World of Warcraft purposes, that means that anytime you kill a boss and they drop an item, there's a chance the item can roll Warforged. And that just means there's a chance that it'll be either higher level, or it'll have bonus attributes, or it'll in some way, shape, or form be stronger. In the newest expansion, they introduced the idea of Titan Forged, which means your Warforged item can Warforged, etc., up a really high tree. And sometimes you just get totally surprised with, oh my god, this item is incredible. I never expected to find something like this. So WoW started moving their game back from the deterministic structure that we had accidentally introduced over the years and tried to reinsert sort of a randomized reward system. Around this time is when Diablo 3 launched, and they were tackling some of their own problems that were very similar to these. In Diablo 3, if you have, who's played Diablo 3? Okay, this is great. This is so much easier for me. I'm still going to explain things, but at least you all know what I'm talking about. So in Diablo 3, items were fully randomized, meaning you could find any item on any character with any stats. What this often felt like was this. So you could find an item on your barbarian that was meant for a demon hunter, like a quiver, and had stats that were for a wizard. So items that just were usable or useful to no one could just drop in Diablo 3. What this meant was, because it was so random whether or not you could find an upgrade, the odds of any individual item actually being better than what you had were remarkably slim. I love this comic because it's pretty commiserate with the experience that you would have in D3 at launch. Your items, in order to be good, needed to have a lot of very specific things, and the system was very random. So did it have your primary stat? Okay, was it the right primary stat? Someone didn't listen to the phone ringing comment. It's cool. Did it have crit? Okay, you got crit. All right. Does it have crit damage? Okay, you're 3 out of 4 so far. Does it have a socket? No, all right, it's garbage. Just throw it away. So that led people to having experiences similar to this comic strip, which is why I love this. The best item in the game, in theory, would in reality be pretty awful compared to a twig or a fish that had a socket shoved in its head. So since the reward structure was so random, and this was an average user experience for Diablo 3 at the time, players would often find themselves sort of accidentally corralled into the complete opposite reward system, which was the auction house. So the game was so random, and players felt like, well, I can't find the items I need to progress. I can do Inferno Act 1, but getting into Act 2 is impossible because there's bees in the canyon that murder me. I don't understand your game. So people would end up in the system where, okay, well, the reward system is not working for them because they feel like they have no control over it. But there's also the auction house, and many players found themselves feeling forced into the auction house and replacing a reward system that at its core was intended to be randomized with a fully deterministic reward system. It took the sense of excitement and anticipation with killing monsters and finding items, and basically made Diablo 3 a game about playing the auction house instead of playing the game. So as we were working on Reaper of Souls, we knew we sort of had this problem to tackle, and we're trying to figure out, like, okay, well, how do we get people killing monsters to find the things they want instead of resorting to the auction house? So Reaper of Souls development, we talked about a lot of things. We talked about what we wanted to do with the items, like, okay, well, if we want people to find their own stuff, we probably are going to need to soul bind items so that they can't just freely trade items around. That was sort of a big topic for us at the time. People had years and years of stories of like, yeah, but in D2, I used to give my buddy all this cool stuff, and it was great, and I would trade with people and chat. And we started talking about, like, well, what is the effect you're actually having on that person's experience? Like, you had one good story of, yeah, I gave my buddy all this cool stuff, and then you took away all the stories of him going, yeah, I found all these cool things, because you just handed him some of the best stuff in the game. So we sort of talked about the nostalgia of that versus the actual impact it was having on the game. And for Reaper of Souls, we decided, okay, well, the first thing we have to do to actually fix this problem and get players finding cool things is just get rid of the auction house. The auction house was an interesting experiment, but ultimately it detracted too much from the experience we wanted our players to have. It was really hard for them to find cool things when they could just save up 1 million gold and go buy that really cool item that they would never see on their own. It also just sort of detracted from the entire experience. Like, Diablo at its core is a game about killing guys and finding cool stuff, not about being a merchant who is slowly bankrolling his way to victory. So in addition to removing the auction house, we did a lot of other things, like generally increase the drop rate across the game massively of all of the good items, the legendary items. We introduced a lot of systems that would help remove some of the negative end of the RNG. We didn't want things like a quiver with intellect dropping for a barbarian, because that just makes no sense for anyone. So we put in place a lot of rules that made sure, like, okay, well, it's all right to sometimes get items that aren't for your character, as long as they at least make sense for someone else's character. If you found a quiver with Dex, maybe you've got a demon hunter you like playing, that's okay. Maybe you can give it to your buddy that's in your game. We introduced systems like our Enchanter. Our Enchanter would let you take one item affix and reroll to a different random item affix. And you could do that as many times as you wanted, assuming you could continue paying the escalating cost. So this allowed situations like that awesome legendary item to not actually be worse than the twig or the fish, because if you really needed a socket, you could just put a socket on the item. So things that were almost good became usable to the players. Additionally, we took the lessons that we learned with Badges of Justice on World of Warcraft and applied them to Diablo. I recall I recall Josh Muscari and Kevin Martins telling me, hey, look, we want a currency in Diablo 3 for Reaper of Souls, to which my immediate reaction was, dear God, no, you don't. Do not make me do this. So after much insisting on their behalf, I eventually went, okay, look, if we have to do a currency, if we had to do it, it's okay as long as the players don't directly control the outcome. Like, we could introduce it where we could allow the currency to be a way for players to modify the random as long as at its core it's still random. So the ultimate solution we came up with is, and if you played D3, you probably recognize Kadala, but this is Kadala. She's a merchant. She takes blood shards, which are a form of currency that you earn by doing bounties or rifts in the game, and is meant as a way to sort of give players some sense of control because, again, Diablo 3 was so wildly random at the start of at the launch of the game, that we did want players to feel like, well, okay, if you really want item X, how do you get item X? Kadala would allow you to turn in blood shards, and she would give you a randomly generated, in this case, two-handed weapon. So if you're a demon hunter and you go to her and you're buying two-handed weapons, you're going to find stuff like bows or crossbows. If you're a barbarian, you're going to find things like mighty weapons or two-handed axes. Less important was really players being able to have the exact item they want. A type of feedback I get all the time, or I've heard many times over the years, is like, man, I really want item, fill in the blank, and still haven't gotten it. My response to that is usually, that's cool, I want you to want things, as long as you're having a positive experience with the game. Like, the journey of finding that thing should keep you enticed in some way. And Kadala was meant to sort of capture that, like, okay, if you really want the Wand of Woe, you can buy one-handed weapons, you have a chance of finding that specific legendary, and along the way, maybe you'll find something that you had a lot of fun with. Like, oh, I found this other wand I totally never would have thought to use, but I'm using it now, and it's a good time. So really, the lesson that took way too long to learn there was deterministic and random rewards both have different strengths and weaknesses. Know which one will deliver the player experience you want. Make everything feel overpowered. Next lesson. How I learned to stop worrying about balance and start focusing on the fun. All right, so for this one, I want to tell the story of WoW and scaling items. So a goal of the WoW team has always been to try and ensure that, to some degree, the game is balanced. There's lots of different tiers of content, lots of progression that players are meant to sort of walk their way through. And long ago in a land far away, there were actually items that were so completely untunable that we didn't know what to do with them. This is a screenshot of an old engineering trinket. Some of you may or may not remember this. This would allow you to, on use, reflect a spell back at the caster, which generally was just like, oh, that's neat. It's kind of gimmicky, not super useful. It's got a 5-minute cooldown. I'm probably not going to use it. Oh, wait, there's this dragon that does this really powerful spell at me. I wonder if this works. Yep, that works. Okay, sweet. Dead dragon. So we sort of found ourselves with these handful of items sprinkled throughout the game that we just couldn't do any. We had no idea how to tune these. The game did not work with these items in existence. And it was decided, okay, we've got to get rid of these scaling items. Unfortunately, as we started working to sort of try to weed these items out of the game by, I think this screenshot, yeah, chance to be resisted when used by players over level 60. That was sort of a heavy-handed way of saying, look, you're not allowed to use this anymore. This is not going to work as you move into the next expansion and beyond. The problem was, these were really the only interesting things that WoW had going on in terms of the item game. For the most part, whenever you'd look at a WoW item, it was just a long list of stats, and you would have to figure out, like, okay, I don't know, like, is this one good? Is that one good? Who can say? So when we got rid of scaling items, unfortunately, we ended up in a land where our items were just really complicated math problems. This also sort of was the start of where third-party websites like Ask Mr. Robot or Roar sort of came into existence, where we'd taken all the things that were interesting out of the game to make it more balanceable for us as designers. And the consequence was a player couldn't even look at any two items and figure out, well, which of these is better. We'd replaced things like 2% crit chance with 150 crit rating. Like, what does that even mean? I don't understand a rating. And the end result was no one understood anything, including the developers. Like, if you ask me, like, which of these is better, like, I don't know, probably the one that's higher level, but actually not, because I made it and I split it 3 ways instead of 2 ways. Like, I don't know. Numbers are complicated. In the same token, Diablo 3 was sort of dealing with a lot of these exact same problems. The items in Diablo 3 were a lot more powerful than the items in World of Warcraft, but they were also really, really complicated math problems, especially because they were so randomized. And even in the case of something like Mempo of Twilight, even if you understood the math, you would need to understand the nuanced rules of how the items worked to figure out why this would even be good. Like, oh, okay, Mempo of Twilight has haste on a hat, which normally is not allowed to have haste, so that makes this a good item. What? I'm sorry if you ever had to figure that out. So we had a lot of items that were strong because they broke the rules, not because they were interesting in any way. My mouse isn't working, sorry. There we go. So at this point, I had been on the World of Warcraft team for about 7 years, and I was transferring over to help the Diablo 3 team sort of tackle a lot of the problems that they were having with their item system. And I remember one of the first things they tasked me to do when I joined after they had launched the game was, hey, can you just do like a review of our item philosophies versus what you think they should be? I was like, yeah, I can do that. That sounds fun. And I did a very long write-up of like, okay, well, you drop too much stuff. The items that you're dropping, like, players can't understand. There should be some semblance of correlation between rarity and power so that people understand when they find that legendary, it is probably better than the yellow thing they're wearing, even though that wasn't true. And I remember as we were working on Reaper of Souls, we started sort of executing on a lot of these philosophy changes. And at the time, I was talking to my brother, and I was saying, like, yeah, here's all the problems we're trying to tackle. And he gave me the best advice I've gotten in years, which was just do everything that you could never do with items on WoW. I was like, okay, that's a good idea. Let's start from that point and see what we end up with. So as we continued working on Reaper of Souls, we started having brainstorms, and we took all of our items and just went, okay, these are the legendary items. They're terrible. They're really complicated math problems. They're not interesting. How do we make these cool? We started having brainstorms where we just focused on the fantasy. This is an item called Gold Wrap, which used to just do nothing. And as we were having a brainstorm with the team, I was sitting there going like, all right, Gold Wrap, what does this do? And one of our artists chimed in like, I've just got this idea where like gold's flying off the ground and just like sheathing me in armor. So we were like, that's really cool. I don't know what that even means, but let's make it anyways. So for Gold Wrap, we took that idea and went, all right, how can we turn that into a gameplay mechanic? All right, whenever you pick up gold, you get bonus armor. Hopefully this doesn't suck, who knows? Let's throw it in the game and see what happens. So at that point, we started focusing on just purely fantasy-driven design. We started taking all of these ideas that were really based on the thematic, the name, the visual, and sort of implementing based on that instead of based on what would be statistically good or statistically balanced. We wanted item tooltips to sort of just unlock possibility in the player's mind. So when they would read an item, they would go, man, that sounds awesome. I don't even know what that means. It's really easy to make things powerful because, well, numbers say so. But it's a lot more interesting when we could accomplish that same level of power increase in a way that would modify the player's gameplay in some way. An example I use a lot is Exploding Palm. If you've ever played a monk in D3, you know what that is. It would be trivial to say Exploding Palm deals 500% more damage. Like, all right, I'm going to wear that item. It's good. I get it. But we would generally try to approach that in a way that would actually do something to your gameplay. So Exploding Palm now applies to all enemies in a 10-yard radius. Like, oh, all right, cool. Now I'm like comboing it with Cyclone Strike and trying to find other items that like clump enemies together and using Exploding Palm. And it's still really powerful, but it would be also interesting. So back on the Legion development at this point. So World of Warcraft was also sort of trying to tackle some of these problems. They wanted to recapture a sense that anything can happen or that you could find awesome items in unexpected places. That sort of was what led to them introducing Titan Forged and allowing items to roll increasingly higher level based on the content you're doing. They also started tackling their own version of the D3 legendary system. Oops, I'm sorry. I skipped a slide in my head. Artifact weapons. Okay, we'll talk about that first. So artifact weapons were sort of D3 or World of Warcraft's way of tackling this same idea where they wanted to really make the items feel like more than just a big numbers game, more than just stat sticks. They wanted them to feel like part of your progression. They introduced things like Ashbringer and Doomhammer, or things that players were familiar with from years and years of the lore, as things that were equipable and usable by the players. They also introduced their own version, or I should say updated version of legendary items. So legendary items were a thing that also existed in World of Warcraft for years, but unless you were one of the most elite raiders or the most hardcore players, you were likely to never even see these. Maybe a handful of people on a server in any given expansion would ever even have access to these. For Legion, they wanted to really make these more broadly applicable, something that more of the player base would interact with. And around this time was when we had sort of wrapped up on Reaper launch, and we sent a couple of our designers over to them to sort of help them brainstorm and come up with a lot of their own legendaries in the same vein. And ultimately, our takeaway from all of that was it's just more important for players to feel awesome than for game balance to be perfect. Lastly, be generous, or how I stopped worrying about giving players too much loot. So, just a quick rehash for those of you who, again, didn't play WoW, which was most of you did, so we're good. Long ago in a land far away, 40-man raids, we dropped 2 items. And really, this is the most important lesson I've learned to date, and probably the one that took me the longest to learn. Once upon a time, working on WoW, especially as an associate designer 12 years ago, WoW felt like such a monumental game, and it was very nerve-wracking to be in any way, shape, or form responsible for touching the reward structure of it. There was always this sense that, like, we're gonna break the whole game, we're gonna screw this up, we're all gonna lose our jobs, oh my god, players are gonna quit. And I know that's a bit hyperbolic, but being an associate designer on World of Warcraft, that was certainly the vibe that you had from time to time. So anytime we would talk about, like, well, how do we give out more rewards? Like, oh, we can't. If we give out more rewards, they're going to stop playing our game. But I think 40 people earning 2 items, there was a bit of give to have. So in WoW, 40-man raids, we used to give 2 items. Moving into Burning Crusade, we sort of reduced the raid size down to 25. We also introduced 10-man raids. We were giving somewhere between 2 and 4 items per raid boss in Burning Crusade. We had also introduced, what did we call them, set tokens. Back in old school WoW, whenever you would kill a boss, he would drop a set piece for class X or class Y. That felt okay when you had 40 people who were like, oh, it's the hunter hat, I can totally use that. When you had 10 or 25 people, it was a lot more likely that you didn't necessarily have every class represented. So we had turned the set items into tokens as sort of another layer of giving players more usable loot. Additionally, when we introduced Curzon and the 10-man raid, we thought, well, okay, we can give out 2 items. They're not that good. They're not going to use them forever. It's okay. Like 25 people get 2. 10 people can get 2 also because they're kind of bad. And at the time, this felt like a huge leap forward, especially coming from, again, 40-man raids giving 2 items, 25-man raids gave 2 to 4 items, 10-man raids also gave 2 items. And fast forward all the way to today, where World of Warcraft, they've introduced something called World Quests, which allow players to do outdoor world content that they've already played through as sort of a randomly generated rehash where the game goes, okay, today if you want to do these allotment of quests, which you already did, here's the rewards that you'll get. Those rewards can be up to like low-level epics, and then as you do those quests, those rewards can also warforge, so some really, really good items come from just doing single-player outdoor world content. And then additionally on the World of Warcraft front, they also introduced this expansion, something called Mythic Dungeons. Mythic dungeons are basically a way to do 5-man content with random affixes of increasing difficulty. And based on how high the level of the dungeon is and the amount of time you beat it within, you can earn multiple chests, which each give 2 items total, up to a max of 6 raid quality items for a 5-man group. So WoW has come a long way from the land of 40-man for 2 item to up to 6 items for a 5-man group. But really, when I learned this lesson myself was while we were developing Reaper of Souls. So back during Reaper of Souls development, we were trying to figure out, like, okay, we're adding these legendaries to the game, we're changing how the reward systems work, we're putting in these effects that we have made no attempt to balance, because who knows what's going to happen. So we thought, all right, we have to get a lot of PTR testing on this. So our game went into beta, and our way of getting lots of PTR testing was just going, all right, we're just going to like quadruple the drop rates of everything. Our target at the time was about 1 legendary an hour. That was sort of like, 1 an hour is about what we want players to find. We were coming from a pre-Reaper of Souls land where I think Josh Mosquera's example he always liked to use was it took him 100 hours to get his first legendary. So we were like, all right, they're going to be swimming in this stuff compared to what they're used to. So we started getting feedback. And players were just saying, like, okay, yeah, this is really good. I like these items. This drop rate feels great. And I'm like, sweet, glad you like the items. Don't get used to that drop rate. There's no way I'm shipping this live. So around that time, the game launched. People had just generally been enjoying the new changes to the system. The items were now interesting. And people seemed to just generally enjoy what they were seeing. Like, we went from a land where everything was very math-focused to a land where the items were driven by a strong fantasy. And it seemed to be working out well. The only feedback that we consistently got was like, man, I wish I found more items. If you ever work with rewards, you will hear that feedback all the time, always, without fail. It never goes away, believe me. So the game launched. We thought, okay, this is good. This is about the frequency that we want to see the items dropping at. But then I remember we got some metrics on here's the average user experience, here's the rate that they're finding them. And for some of our players, the numbers seemed about what we were shooting for, and for a lot of people who didn't play as efficiently, they were a lot lower. So I thought, you know what, there's room to increase this. We're just going to drop everything twice as much as what we currently had it tuned at. That means our hardcore players will be getting a little bit more than we want, but the average user will be seeing the right experience. Around that time, we had our D3 anniversary event, which was, I believe, the 3rd year anniversary for the original Diablo 3 launching, and we wanted to do some kind of community event to celebrate. What we ended up settling on was, all right, we're going to do a buff. We're just going to double the drop rate of legendaries and blood shards, and we'll let players swim in loot for a little while. It'll be fun. So we shipped our legendary drop week. And about 2 days in, I remember sitting at home playing and going like, holy crap, this is going to last for way too long. This should not have been a week. We are going to get flayed the second we turn this off, because at this point, it's just going to be the new norm. Like, players are just going to think this is how the game should work. And the forums were very happy to tell us that this is just how the game should work. So we started having conversations as we were nearing the end of this week. I remember going to our director and lead and saying, like, all right, look, this is way higher than anything we wanted previously, but we should just get ahead of this, because this is just going to be a nightmare the second we disable it. We should just say we're going to leave it this way forever. It's a gift to the players. Let's make it look like good PR instead of Blizzard, you suck for taking away my items. So we talked it over for about an hour, and they agreed. And we said, okay, we're just going to leave it. Let's make a blog post. Let's tell the players. And I'll go ahead and hotfix the data to coincide with the disabling of the weekend event buff. And we'll just double it again, because why not? Fuck it. So around this time, someone's going to tell me not to say that afterwards, I'm sure. So around this time, we stopped getting feedback about I can't find cool items. The drop rates were quadruple what I initially had targeted them at. They were similar to our PTR beta testing levels. And the feedback instead just started becoming, yeah, I found that cool item. Now I'm trying to get a better version of that cool item. I was like, okay, the sky's not falling. It's quadruple what I wanted, but everyone still seems happy. They're still playing the game. Granted, we have some different problems to solve now. This is around the time that we decided to introduce ancient items. Really, the biggest problem that we were having was, okay, for the average user, this is a great experience. They're finding cool stuff that they hadn't found before. They're getting to experience all these different play styles. Only the really hardcore portions of our player base are like swimming in items. We wanted to have something for them to find that was exciting, that would sort of preserve their anticipation. So we introduced the concept of ancient items. Ancient items are really simple. If you're not familiar with what they are in D3, it's just anytime a legendary drops, the item has a chance to be ancient, and if it is ancient, it just has higher stats. That's it. But it did sort of give us the justification we needed to say, well, the drop rates are really high, but we'll just make something for the hardcore people. This actually feels great for our average users. We also then introduced a system called Kanai's Cube, which was sort of another way for players to sort of create the items that they were chasing after. At this point in the game's life cycle, Kadala had been around and running for a while. We thought this works out well. And we wanted to sort of add a lot more hooks in for players to have control over what kind of rewards they were receiving. In the case of the cube, it's kind of a souped up version of Kadala. You can put in exactly the type of item you want. Like, I want a two-handed bow. You put a bow in the box, you put some special crafting materials in, you push the button, legendary bow gets generated. So this was another way that we gave players to sort of tailor the rewards that they received. And at the end of all that, we introduced seasons. Seasons were a way for players to sort of find a good opportunity to come back into the game, to check it out with friends and play it from a clean slate. Or just, if you enjoyed the game and had taken a break and wanted to see new content, this provided a great opportunity for that. And around this time, I'd say reward drop rates were 10 to 15 times higher than what I had originally anticipated based on introduction of buffs like the weekend event, increased levels of difficulty. We added greater rifts, and the greater rifts went up to level 100, and the higher you went, the more you got. So people were literally swimming in loot compared to anything that we had ever initially anticipated. But I think it all worked out really well because ultimately we have seasons and people that come back, play a season, and they know they're going to have a great week or two. D3 sees millions of recurring users every time we launch a new season. And I personally think it's because they know it's just going to be a fun couple days or a week with their buddies and go like, hey, new D3 season came out. Sweet, let's go crazy. All right, cool, we're done. We won, moving on. And they're a lot more tolerant of coming back to check out the new stuff we add because they know they're likely to see it or get to play with it. So through all of that, really the biggest lesson I learned and the one that took me personally the longest to learn was this. No design is perfect, and we're always going to have problems to solve. It's better to solve the problem of players having everything they want than trying to solve the problems caused by players being frustrated with stingy rewards. And that is my talk, and thank you for coming. Hi, I think we have a few minutes. They're going to kick me out at some point, but yeah, let's do questions.
Thanks so much for your talk. Nikki Crenshaw, I'm a PhD student at UC Irvine. I just had a question about the being generous point, because I think I can totally see it for Diablo where it's kind of a loot pinata system, but for something like World of Warcraft, where like looking back in like 40-man raids where you have 2 items dropping off of a boss, and maybe I don't get a piece of loot, but somebody in my guild does, and so I know our guild is getting better, or I'm excited for them. And I know that WoW has changed in a way where you're doing more LFR and group finder stuff, and so when you were talking about like rewarding certain behaviors or tricking players into behaving in a certain way that you don't intend, do you see it as more focusing on the individual player rather than a collaborative group setting in rewarding things that way?
Do I think the focus should be more on rewarding the individual versus the organization? Is that the question? I have personally very strong feelings about that, but since I don't work on WoW these days, I may be misquoting. I personally think that it's all about focusing on the player myself. I do think that I still preach be generous to the WoW developers on a regular basis. It's come a long ways and it's very rewarding. Like I know I can gear out a new character from head to toe really high level, really quick compared to anything before. I do think for WoW, there's a strong sense of maintaining a community, maintaining strong social structures like guilds or parties of friends. And I think they take a more holistic view of it, where they try to make sure like, okay, your group of friends is feeling adequately rewarded or your guild feels like their contributions matter. I personally, just blanket design sense, like rewarding the person sitting at the computer, not the avatar or not the individual character they're playing. So I can't really speak to how they would do things because I know we differ a bit on that. I don't like things like, why do I have to do all of these reps on every character? Why do I have to do this balanced power quest line again? Like, I already did this. So I think what they do works for their game. I think it works for their goals. I think mine are a bit more individual focused than theirs are, though.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm a casual WoW player. Let's just start with that.
Average user.
Yeah.
I don't like casual.
So, Mista Pandaria, I was a healer for my guild. 97 chances, not counting bonus rolls, to get a trinket. Now, this is specifically my problem.
Okay.
Is weapons and trinkets on WoW characters are very important for your skill level and ability to be able to carry your guild through hard fights in raids. 97 chances, and I was still wearing 2 trinkets from the previous raid set. It was noticeable to the point where I could not help my guild succeed and ended up not wanting to raid because of this. Now, I understand the concept, like if it were bracers or a belt, it's not that big of a deal. It's not gonna dramatically change the way I heal. But with the loss of badges of frost, which I actually thought was a great system.
I'm sorry.
With the loss of that, I had no way of guaranteeing that I was going to get one of these critically important items. And it really actually hurt my experience and the 12 other people who were running with me. Like, it hurt their experience too. Is there ever a point where you guys at Blizzard decide, well, weapons are more, well, weapons, they'd fix that in Legion, but weapons or trinkets or these items that are dramatically larger upgrades than other items, to say, hey, we should maybe drop these more, or we should guarantee a way of getting them outside of RNG? Right,
So the question is, how do we feel about the random variants for items that are perceived as more valuable?
Yes.
I personally think the story you just told is a great example of a lot of the stuff that I generally have been trying to talk about, which is a negative. It is very easy for people to say like, oh, we just make stuff hard to get. That keeps people engaged more. I find that to not be true. I find that it's a lot easier for players to quit your game because of experiences like that. Like, well, you got bad luck. You know, like as designers, it's easy to get like, well, you know, random is random. I personally feel like that's when we need to put systems in place to sort of offset that a bit. Like when I talked about, or I don't remember if I talked about it in this, but I've historically talked a lot about during Reaper of Souls, we put a lot of effort in to sort of shave the negative end of random off, like the bad part of that bell curve where people had, I never got the thing, like, all right, well, let's get rid of that. Let's keep the good end of the bell curve where sometimes you get a lot of things. For WoW, I think systems that allow you to feel like you have more control over the outcome are better. I think they introduced the bonus roll tokens to sort of allow an outlet in that direction. I still think they have further that they could go. I know I still had these conversations with them a lot recently about like their legendary drops, where you know they have an expected acquisition rate, they're massively impactful to people's performance. I know plenty of people who have used that as an exit point from the game of like, well, I just got one, it's bad, it's not gonna let me be high on my DPS meter, and I know it's gonna be X amount of time before I even get a chance at a new one. And I think that's where, as an industry, we just need to be more cognizant of the actual negative implications of using rewards. I think it's too easy to just think, oh, rewards make everything better, and not really understand the psychological impact of what happens when random isn't on your side. So for WoW, they certainly could do more to improve that. I think that they are aware of that, and I think that they are going to do things like that in the future, but I don't know the exact details of how. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Hi there.
Oh, hi. Oh, man. Okay, real quick. So we have 5 minutes left. They'll probably kick me out sooner. I'm going to go to Overlook 2022 after this. So if any of y'all I don't get to, I will meet you in the other room and we can continue talking.
I'll keep mine pretty brief. How much do you use usability studies right before you even go to alpha? As you're getting, you get all your metrics in, but at what point, as you're trying to find these cool new ideas you're doing, at what point do you start incorporating user studies and just trying to get a sense of how the bigger audience might react to it? So I guess the question was about usability studies in general.
Yeah, no, how much usability study testing do we get?
How much and how often, in the cycle?
I think that's going to vary depending on the team. I know for both World of Warcraft and Diablo 3, we have a very confident and excellent group of people at Blizzard whose job is just to do the business intelligence studies. They give us whatever data we ask for. Usually if we don't have data, it's because we didn't think to ask for it ahead of time, and then we have to put in hooks so that programmers can get the data fed to them. It certainly drives a lot of choices, or at least informs them. There have definitely been times where we thought oh, we should, I think the drop rates look like this, and then we get data and we're like, oh, just nope, not even close. All right, increase everything. We suck at our job. So I think usually we use that kind of data to help us make better decisions, but we don't use it to drive our decisions.
Cool.
If that makes sense.
It does, yeah.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I have a question. In reference to the stuff about being generous, do you feel like there's a discrete amount of generosity that should be based to the game, or is it all relative to the previous state of the game? Like, if D3 was released with the drop rates, the 4x drop rates you're talking about in the PTR, do you feel that players would have been content with that drop rate, or would have been asking for a higher drop rate regardless of the state that the game was released in?
That's a good question. Do I think that it's relative?
Right. Do you think
I
that?
think they had to get acclimated to one item every 100 hours to appreciate 4 an hour. Is that the question?
The question is more like, do you feel that players will always ask for more?
Oh yeah. Oh no. 100%. They will always ask for more.
So like, at what
100%.
point do you stop giving them more items? You said that it got to 10 to 15 times the amount of.
Honestly, I don't know if there's too much. I think that's always the worry, though. The worry is always, well, if we give them everything, they're done, right? They're going to leave. And I find that no matter how much more we gave them, all that really happened was we started trying to solve for different problems. Okay, they've got everything. Now what? So let's make some more things. Let's make harder things for them to use all those cool items on. I think there is almost no world where it wasn't better to just give more. Granted, your game will dictate that to some degree. In Diablo, it's a very randomized reward structure. The items you find are random. You could find a better version of the item you already had. So we had that going for us. World of Warcraft, with their Warforged system, has some degree of that too. Well, maybe you already got everything you wanted, but there's the better version out there. So I think how much random versus how much deterministic structure is in your game is really going to dictate that. But I would almost always champion finding ways to allow you to give the player more. Maybe put some random in there so that you can justify yeah, you get 7 versions of everything, and that's cool because X, Y, and Z.
Okay, thank you.
Hi. So, casual Diablo player here. So when you get items in the game, you can go to a merchant and sell it back for gold. Mm-hmm. So what I used to do when I started playing was just accumulate a lot of items, and then I could go to a merchant and I had this system that would just evaluate the value of all my items with an objective scale, the gold. And being a casual player, I would just sell everything that was the lowest value and keep the highest value item, and then I would hate myself later in the game because I sold something that turned out to be more useful, even though it was worth less gold. So my question is, do you think having an objective scale in the game that it allows you to just immediately assess the value of the items is a good thing, and can it be replaced with something else?
I think it could be. Do I think having an objective scale that allows you to evaluate items is a good thing?
Yeah.
Yes, if that information was accurate. I think for a lot of people who had no understanding, I think Diablo 3 and WoW, I think both of our games' items are far too complicated. They take way too much work to evaluate. I think the fact that you were basing any decisions off the vendor value is completely reasonable, and it's what most people do. Like, oh, the better thing must be more valuable, right?
Right.
And I think you were trying to do that because that was the only way that the game presented you to try to figure out like which of these is better. For Reaper of Souls, we tried to improve that a bit by inserting up and down arrows saying like this item's better, this item's worse. I know a lot of people in World of Warcraft still use item level as some kind of gauge, which is wrong most of the time. And I think that's that fault is on us. Like as a company, Blizzard needs to provide either more understandable choices or better tools to understand them. So I think our games are not good examples of finding a solution to that problem. I do think it is completely reasonable for your players to want that information. And I think if you're going to give them any information, it should help drive them in the correct direction.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think I'm going to have to get out of here now, guys. So I'm going to go to room 2022. For all the rest of you that wanted to ask questions or just be nerds and talk more, come on over and I'll chat with you there.